In the year 1912, the Missouri Ozarks were a land of rugged hills, whispering pines, and winding rivers that shimmered under the sun. At the heart of those hills lay a little town called Hallows Creek. On the surface, it looked like every other settlement in the region. A main street lined with general stores, a smithy, a small church, and fields that stretched out into the wild. But beneath that quiet simplicity lived a kind of tension that no one could put into words. Outsiders often said Hallows Creek seemed stuck, not just in time, but in spirit. The townsfolk carried themselves with a wary politeness, as if they feared one another's memories. Children played barefoot in the dirt roads, but older folks would hush them quickly when their laughter strayed too close to the old limestone courthouse at the town center. Travelers noticed how adults never looked at it directly, how conversations stalled whenever its shadow fell across them. Into this place came Thomas Avery, a young schoolteacher from St. Louis. With a clean suit, round glasses, and a hopeful gleam in his eyes, Thomas arrived with dreams of shaping young minds and starting a new life away from the city. Yet the moment he stepped off the wagon, he felt the weight of eyes upon him. The locals smiled, yes, but their smiles were thin, their words careful. The courthouse loomed behind them all, silent and gray, like a sentinel over the town. Thomas could not know on that first day that the building he saw as nothing more than architecture would soon consume his thoughts, his fears, and his destiny. Thomas set up in a modest room at Mrs. Winslow's boarding house. She was a frail but sharp-tongued widow who prided herself on knowing everyone's business. At supper that night, she served cornbread and beans, asking him about his family, his studies, and why he had come to their quiet corner of Missouri. "To teach," Thomas said with a smile. "The world is changing fast. Even here, the children deserve to know it." Mrs. Winslow pursed her lips. "Change is not always welcome here, Mr. Avery. Folk in Hallows Creek prefer their past where it belongs, forgotten." It was a strange thing to say, and Thomas pressed gently. "What past do you mean?" Her fork clattered against her plate. "None worth remembering," she muttered. "Best you keep your lessons to arithmetic and spelling, son." Later that evening, Thomas strolled through town. He passed men smoking pipes on porches, women rocking babies to sleep, but all the while, he felt the courthouse looming in his periphery. Its stone walls caught the moonlight, its broken shutters hanging like weary eyelids. The longer he stared, the colder he felt. Sheriff Clive Turner appeared then, as if summoned by Thomas's curiosity. The sheriff was broad-shouldered, his mustache flecked with gray, his voice firm. "Evening, teacher. Best not to linger near the courthouse after dark. Some places are better left alone." Thomas chuckled nervously. "Superstitions?" "History," the sheriff said flatly. Then he tipped his hat and walked off. That night, lying awake in his rented bed, Thomas thought of his welcome. Friendly faces hiding something, words left unsaid, and always that courthouse staring from the heart of town like a wound that refused to heal. The next morning, Thomas rang the brass bell outside the small schoolhouse, calling children from the fields and porches. Boys with straw hats and girls with braids gathered eagerly, for a new teacher meant new stories and games. Their laughter filled the dusty air, and Thomas's heart swelled with purpose. As a first lesson, he asked them to draw their town, a simple exercise to ease them in. Crayons scraped against paper as they sketched barns, streams, and wagons. Yet when Thomas walked among their desks, he froze. Nearly every child had drawn the courthouse. Not just drawn it, emphasized it. The limestone building loomed in their pictures, darker than all else. Some had shaded windows in black. One child, a quiet girl named Elsie May, had drawn it with red streaks across the glass. "Elsie," Thomas asked softly, kneeling by her desk, "why the red?" She stared at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Because the people inside are still screaming." The room fell silent. No one giggled, no one rolled their eyes. Instead, another boy muttered, "We ain't supposed to talk about it." Thomas tried to reassure them, but unease coiled in his chest. Later, when the children filed out, he lingered over the drawings, 20 small sketches, each carrying the same grim obsession. That evening, against better judgment, Thomas walked past the courthouse again. He swore he felt the temperature drop, the night air heavy with sorrow, and though no sound reached his ears, he could not shake the sense that somewhere within those walls, someone was indeed still crying. The following day, Thomas was teaching spelling when a knock echoed on the doorframe. Sheriff Turner stood there, his presence filling the room. The children's chatter died instantly. "Mr. Avery," the sheriff said, his tone polite but cold. "A word." Outside, beneath the oak tree, Turner crossed his arms. "You're stirring things best left still. I hear you've been asking the children about the courthouse." Thomas frowned. "I didn't ask. They drew it themselves." Turner's eyes hardened. "And you encouraged it. Listen, teacher, you seem a decent man, but you don't understand the ground you're standing on. That courthouse is a scar. The more you pick at it, the more you'll bleed. Stick to your books." Thomas straightened. "But isn't it my duty to help them understand history? How can they learn if the truth is hidden?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Some truths'll poison a man. Some truths'll get him killed." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Thomas staring after him. Back inside, Thomas looked at his students differently. Their wide eyes held questions they dared not ask. He realized then that silence had been forced upon them by fear. That night, Thomas wrote in his journal, "What happened in this town? What blood lingers here?" He knew he was standing on dangerous ground, but he also knew he could not walk away. It was close to midnight when a faint knock rattled Thomas's door. He opened it to find Elsie May, barefoot and trembling, clutching a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Mama says I shouldn't, but you need to know," she whispered, thrusting it into his hands before glancing nervously down the hallway. Inside the cloth lay a brittle newspaper, its edges yellowed with age. Thomas unfolded it carefully. The headline leapt at him. "Bloodbath at the courthouse. Dozens dead." His heart raced as he read fragments. A trial gone wrong, a mob storming the courthouse, chaos and gunfire, over 20 killed in a single night. Then, abruptly, the article ended with the words, "Further publication prohibited by order of state officials." Elsie tugged at his sleeve. "They say the ones who died never left. That's why the courthouse cries at night." Thomas looked at her in shock. "Where did you get this?" She bit her lip. "Mama keeps it hidden. Says it's the only copy left." The paper shook in Thomas's hands. It wasn't just superstition. Something terrible had happened here, something the world had been forced to forget, and the silence of the town was not ignorance. It was survival. The next day, Thomas confronted Mrs. Winslow. "Why give me board in this town if you won't let me teach its truth?" he demanded, laying the fragile newspaper before her. She paled, tears welling in her eyes. "Lord, forgive that child," she whispered. "I kept it hidden for a reason." Thomas leaned forward. "Tell me what happened." For a long time, she shook her head. Then, at last, her voice cracked. "They were trying a man named Isaiah Boone, a black farmer accused of stealing cattle. Everyone knew he hadn't done it. The jury was white, the verdict set before the trial began. But when some townsfolk rose to defend him, a mob broke through the doors." Her hands trembled. "Guns fired. People trampled. I heard Isaiah's little boy beg for his daddy's life before a bullet silenced him. By the end, the floor ran red." Thomas sat frozen, horror washing over him. "Why erase it?" "Because the state said it would shame Missouri. They burned records, threatened anyone who spoke. We've lived in fear ever since." Her tears fell freely. "We've buried the dead, but never the guilt." For the first time, Thomas understood. Hallows Creek wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by silence. Driven by equal parts fear and determination, Thomas ventured to the courthouse one stormy night. Rain lashed the windows, wind howled through cracks in the stone. Inside, the air was heavy, damp, and metallic, as if rust and blood clung to the walls. His lantern cast weak light over broken benches and shattered glass. Each step echoed louder than it should have. He told himself it was foolishness, yet his skin prickled with dread. Then he heard it, soft sobbing, faint but distinct, coming from the old courtroom. His pulse thundered as he followed the sound. The room loomed before him, the judge's bench looming like a gallows. And there, in the gallery, he saw a figure, a boy, no older than 8, clutching the rail, eyes wide with sorrow. Thomas gasped. The lantern flickered, and in that instant, the child was gone. Only the whisper remained. "Tell them." The lantern went out completely. In the darkness, Thomas stood trembling, knowing with chilling certainty that the dead were not silent after all. They were waiting. For days, Thomas could think of nothing else. He taught lessons, but his mind returned again and again to that child's voice. "Tell them." At recess, Elsie asked innocently, "Why won't anyone say what happened?" Isn't the truth better than lies? Her question pierced him deeper than any ghost. That night, Thomas sat at his desk, quill in hand, and began to write. He poured out everything he had learned, the whispers of townsfolk, the newspaper's words, the haunting in the courthouse. He wrote not as a historian, but as a witness. Yet fear gnawed at him. Sheriff Turner's warning echoed, "Some truths'll get you killed." What right did he have to drag this town into danger? What if he ruined lives instead of healing them? But then he remembered Isaiah Boone's son, the little boy he had seen with his own eyes. That child's life had been stolen, his memory nearly erased. Thomas whispered aloud, "I owe you this." And so, by candlelight, he continued to write, each word striking like a hammer against the chains of silence. It wasn't long before Sheriff Turner appeared again, this time at Thomas's door. His face was hard, but his voice cracked. "You've been writing, haven't you?" Thomas stiffened. "The story must be told." The sheriff's hands trembled. He sat heavily in a chair, burying his face in his palms. "You think I don't want that?" "My own daddy was in that courthouse. He wasn't there to kill Isaiah. He tried to protect the boy. A bullet found him all the same." Thomas's anger softened. "Then help me. Together we can bring the truth back." Turner looked at him with haunted eyes. "You don't understand. After the massacre, the governor's men came. They swore if we spoke, they'd destroy this town, call us savages, wipe us off the map. We chose silence over extinction. I've carried that shame my whole life." Thomas leaned forward. "Then let's free them, Sheriff. Free your father. Free them all." Turner's silence stretched long. Then finally he whispered, "God help us both." Word spread quietly. One by one, a few townsfolk came to the schoolhouse at night, lanterns in hand. Mrs. Winslow, Reverend Carter, Elsie's mother, each trembling, yet determined. They sat in a circle while Thomas listened. Reverend Carter confessed, "I saw Isaiah's face that night. He knew no verdict could save him. When the mob stormed in, I ran. I've carried that cowardice every day since." Mrs. Winslow sobbed. "I held a dying child in my arms." His little hand went cold in mine. Sheriff Turner bowed his head. "My father died trying to do right. They never even carved his name on a stone." The room filled with weeping and silence, but for the first time in decades, silence was not avoidance. It was release. Thomas wrote down every word, his quill scratching furiously. He realized then that history wasn't only in dusty books or burned newspapers. It lived in memory, in guilt, in courage. When at last the lanterns burned low, The small group knew they were bound together by more than fear. They had broken the silence, and there was no turning back. As dawn broke, Thomas staggered to the boarding house, shaken from the night's visions. Sleep had not come. The Courthouse Massacre replayed in his mind with merciless clarity. He finally confessed to Mrs. Winslow what he had seen. She listened, her face pale but resolute. "Then you've glimpsed what we all live with, son. That night ain't dead. The spirits don't rest because justice never did. Some who survived swore an oath. Speak not, write not, lest the curse follow. That's why we stay silent." "An oath? You mean they swore to bury the truth?" Thomas asked. Mrs. Winslow nodded. "And the few who didn't, well, the sheriff made sure they were buried one way or another." The truth struck like a hammer. Hallows Creek lived in bondage not to memory, but to fear. Fear of its own leaders, fear of its own silence. Later that day, Sheriff Turner himself sought out Thomas. The two men met under the courthouse's shadow. "You've dug deep enough," the sheriff said, his voice weary. "I ought to run you out of town before worse happens." Thomas steadied his breath. "Why protect a lie, Sheriff? Children draw blood-soaked windows. Families whisper behind closed doors. You can't expect silence forever." The sheriff's eyes flickered with something close to shame. "You think I wanted this? I was a boy when it happened. My pa was sheriff then. He told me, 'Clive, the law's only as strong as the men who keep it quiet.' And I've kept it quiet ever since. Not because I believe it's right, but because the dead won't let us go otherwise." Thomas studied him. For all his sternness, the sheriff was haunted too. "You can end it," Thomas said softly, "but only if you let the truth breathe." The sheriff turned away, his voice low. "Endin' it might mean endin' us all." At school, the children's restlessness grew. They whispered among themselves, glancing nervously at the windows. Finally, Elsie May raised her hand. "Mr. Avery, will the courthouse ever stop crying?" she asked. The room fell silent. Thomas swallowed hard, then answered, "Only when the truth is spoken, Elsie. Secrets make wounds fester. Truth makes them heal." A murmur rippled among the students. For the first time, some lifted their heads with a fragile hope. Others looked fearful, as though words themselves might summon the ghosts. That afternoon, Thomas found chalk messages on the schoolhouse wall, scrawled by unknown hands. "Don't speak. Don't stir." But beneath those warnings, written in a child's hand, was another message. "Let them rest." That evening, Thomas was invited to a secret gathering. Farmers, widows, and even a preacher crowded into an old barn lit by lanterns. They had heard whispers that the school teacher wanted the truth told. "You'll get us all cursed," one man hissed. But another woman, her face drawn from years of grief, shook her head. "We've been cursed already. Living under silence is no better than dying." Thomas stood before them. The massacre happened. The world erased it, but you lived it. If the truth is buried, your children will inherit your fear. If it's spoken, maybe they inherit your courage instead. The barn was heavy with silence. Then Elsie May's mother rose, voice trembling but firm. "Let the teacher speak. Let the world know." It was the first crack in the wall of silence. The next day, half the town seemed to stand with Thomas, while the other half glared at him with hostility. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed he was cursed, others said he would bring ruin on them all. Sheriff Turner tried to keep order, but even he could not stem the rising tide. The courthouse loomed, its shadow falling heavier on the streets, as if sensing the unrest. That night, angry men rode past the boarding house, shouting threats. Windows shattered. Mrs. Winslow urged Thomas to leave before it was too late, but he refused. "I didn't come here to run from truth. If I leave now, the silence wins." On Sunday, townsfolk gathered at the courthouse steps, demanding answers. Thomas stood among them, heart pounding. Suddenly, gasps rippled through the crowd. On the limestone walls, faint stains began to bloom, dark streaks spreading like veins. Some swore they saw faces pressing against the windows, mouths open in silent screams. Panic swept the crowd. Mothers clutched children, men crossed themselves, preachers shouted prayers. Sheriff Turner fired his pistol into the air to calm them. This is what happens when the past is stirred. We brought this on ourselves. But Thomas